Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and it kind of looks like Nintendo has leaked the Direct themselves. We've heard about a Nintendo Direct that is supposed to happen next week. We are not sure if it's going to be a partner showcase or a general. There's arguments on both sides, but lately there have been so many different things coming out, a lot of official news announcements, a lot of things that could have been in a Direct that Nintendo has announced, but also there have been some new leaks that have some very interesting implications. There's a lot of conversations about what may show up, and so there's a lot to dive into today, so that's what we're going to be doing. But before going forward, let me simply point out that I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers, so if you enjoy my videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate that subscription. But diving into things here, we've been hearing about so many different announcements as of late. Yesterday was the announcement for the Tomodachi Life Direct that's happening on Thursday. The day before that was the Mario Galaxy Movie Direct showing off Yoshi in a new trailer. Last week we had a Mario Kart Lego tease, a new Mario Wonder Flower trailer, an announcement for Universal Studios Pokemon collaboration, a new overview trailer for Mario Wonder Switch 2 Edition with new modes and characters shown off, a new update to Mario Kart World, a free update to Donkey Kong Country Returns HD that's pretty substantial, including Switch 2 enhancements, and likely more that I've forgotten. There has just been so much that has happened over this last week, many announcements that you would think might show up in a Nintendo Direct, including one big one that happened today regarding Virtual Boy. We got a new trailer, an overview regarding Virtual Boy coming to Nintendo Classics. It will be made available on February 17th. They've shown off the launch lineup, but also other games coming out later this year. And two of these games are unreleased titles that have never come out before, that have never been played by the public. One of them is Zero Racers. It's a spin-off of F-Zero. This initially was going to be the first 3D F-Zero game, but it was cancelled, likely because Virtual Boy was cut short. But then there is also D-Hopper, or Dragon Hopper, a dragon platforming game, and that just sounds awesome. We've never played these games. I've never played any Virtual Boy game, actually, so there's a whole bunch of unplayed Nintendo games that are going to be made available starting on February 17th and released throughout the year. But this, alongside everything else that has happened, really has us wondering what is going on. There have been so many announcements happening recently. Some people have thought that this is kind of like Nintendo clearing the slate, putting out all the smaller announcements and things that wouldn't fit in a big general direct now, so they can have that big general direct that the various insiders have heard about that is happening next week. Insiders like Nash Weedle, who was talking about it first, Attack the Backlog, Switch Force, recently, just yesterday, Nate the Hate. There have been a lot of people who have heard about a direct happening literally next week. A lot of people have heard the date, February 5th. We'll see how much that holds. Yes, still take this with a grain of salt, because even if it is based off real information, things can change behind the scenes, and it's also possible that maybe they heard incorrect information. These are possibilities, even though, yeah, it does seem like some kind of direct is probably happening next week. And so many people kind of feel like there's been this clearing of the slate, but it might not be that. It might be the case that instead of Nintendo clearing the slate, what they're doing is putting out all the first-party related announcements now, so they can just focus on a partner showcase next week. A partner showcase would be just about third-party announcements, and so we would only be learning about Nintendo first-party stuff for the next, month or two, and we don't know what's to happen next. Nintendo could be doing something like that. Now, do I think they should be doing something like that? No. I think that would be a poor look. I think they need to announce some substantial things from themselves, first-party offerings, that will inspire more people to pick up a Nintendo Switch 2. I think if you just run with the first-party offerings we just know about now in a partner showcase, that would not be a good look. That would not be good for Switch 2 sales. Of course, that doesn't mean they won't have strong software sales regardless, because both Pokopia and Tomodachi Life, games that appeal to large casual audiences, are coming out and are very likely going to sell very, very well. But will they push Switch 2 sales? I don't think so, especially because Tomodachi Life is not even a Switch 2 exclusive. It's a Switch 1 title with currently no Switch 2 enhancements announced. So I do think Nintendo should, that doesn't mean they will. And honestly, right now I'm 50-50 on whether it's a partner or a general. Obviously I hope it's a general because I want some first party announcements, And if it is just a partner, well, there could be some cool third-party stuff there. So even if it is a partner, it may still be an exciting presentation. Third-party offerings on Switch 2 have been pretty exciting. So I still think it's going to be a good Direct, but it could be a great Direct if it's a big general Direct. So is there any hope for a general Direct outside of what I brought up? Well, there is this recent leak that just came out that I would say is a pretty big deal. And it's a Walmart leak. As you see here, they had a banner that includes various Nintendo Classics offerings, including Pikmin 2 from Nintendo GameCube and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, also from Nintendo GameCube, games that are not currently available for Nintendo Classics on GameCube for Switch 2. What's going on? Well, given that this is official promotional material, this might be a legitimate leak of other Nintendo Classics announcements that have not been made yet. And this might be a big point for a general Direct to be happening soon, because we just got the Virtual Boy stuff. Maybe Nintendo is putting the Virtual Boy stuff out now, separate from more announcements for Nintendo Classics, because if you have two different platforms featured in one Direct, that might be a little confusing. And so putting out the Virtual Boy stuff out now, and saving the GameCube stuff for a bigger Direct next week might make a lot of sense, and so this gives us some optimism that there could be a general Direct next week, because these would be first-party announcements, not just partner projects here. Now, I should note that even though this does seem like a legitimate leak, and when you look at Walmart's page, it looks like they've already taken down this banner, that does not mean these announcements are going to happen immediately. They could be months from now. However, I will also say, the initial wave of GameCube games, almost all of them have already come out. It is time, or almost time, for them to announce the next wave of GameCube games. And so we are getting close to that point, so us seeing some promotional material that's leaked out showcasing some new GameCube games for Nintendo Classics, it does make a lot of sense, and it is suggestive of an announcement happening soon. So fingers crossed, this is a legitimate sign for a bigger General Direct next week. But there is something else that's been going on that I think I need to speak on here that might be hinting at a bigger General Direct next week, but also might not be at all. And so what I'm getting at here is that there's been a lot of conversation about Nate the Hate's predictions from his Predictions podcast yesterday. We covered this. Nate the Hate is a known industry insider who's gotten many things correct, a great track history, not everything. No one gets everything right, so you still should take everything with a grain of salt. Sometimes plans change behind the scenes, sometimes poor information is spread out. These things happen, but for the most part, Nate the Hate is very reliable, probably one of the most reliable leakers there are. And in yesterday's video, I talked about the things he's heard or his reported leaks and rumors, not his predictions, because those are separate things. His predictions are just his own educated guesses, and I think it's a slippery slope to jump to the conclusion that his predictions are based off something he's heard when he's making sure to note what he has heard versus what he's just predicting. Anyways, that hasn't stopped people from speculating about his predictions, thinking they might be teases for even more announcements that he's not officially leaking, such as a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Definitive Edition. This is something he predicted during his show. Now, again, I think this is a slippery slope. I don't think this prediction is necessarily anything, but maybe it is. Now, why might that be the case? Well, first off, I think it's already pretty clear that Nintendo is going to continue to announce more enhanced Switch 1 titles for Switch 2, either through a free enhancement or a Switch 2 edition. These are the two different paths we've seen. Technically, a Definitive Edition would be something else, but we'll speak on that distinction a little bit later. Point is, Nintendo has been using these free enhancements and Switch 2 editions to help fill up the Switch 2 lineup, kind of like how Nintendo handled the enhanced Wii U ports throughout the Switch 1 era. And so we should definitely be expecting more. The Xenoblade Chronicles series in particular would most benefit from either free enhancements or Switch 2 editions, because these games are large in scale with a great amount of detail and advanced graphical effects, but because of this, Monolith Soft, the developer of the Xenoblade games, had to really scale down the resolution so it could run at least relatively well at 30 frames per second on Switch 1. And so this means the games were kind of soft and blurry. We're talking like sub 720p resolutions here. So these games getting enhanced to 4K or even at least 1440p and also being at 60 FPS would lead to substantial improvements and would make for a bigger difference than even other Switch 2 editions like what we've seen for Breath and Tears of the Kingdom. And so it makes a lot of sense to enhance these particular games. We've even seen a data mine for Xenoblade Chronicles X where there's apparently a 60 FPS mode. Not possible on Switch 1, but perhaps they've been exploring the option for a Switch 2 enhancement of some kind. That makes sense. But there's another angle to consider here, because a few months ago, Monolith Soft did put out a hiring post on Twitter where they shared a clip of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and people noticed that this clip is different from the original clip in the original release on Switch 1. Now, many people came to the conclusion that this is just some sort of weird brightness change that doesn't really have any significance, but I'm not sure I agree actually. Because when you take a look, yes, it is brighter, but why is it brighter? The way it presents to me, it almost looks like maybe a game with new HDR settings that's in need of some tinkering or tweaking, something not possible on a Switch 1 game, but yes, on a Switch 2 game because it supports HDR, high dynamic range. But this brightness, or let's actually say different lighting settings, cast light in a way where the entire background shows way more detail than in the original footage. To me, this is not just upping the brightness, there's something else going on here that requires the game being rendered in a different way. And what adds more evidence to this when we look at the part where Pyra is blowing out these embers, these fiery particle effects, they're not aligned exactly the same even though these scenes are one-to-one. In other words, it's different particle effects, the game has been re-rendered and it's doing things in a different way. Why would it look different in this clip? Some people will say, well, it doesn't necessarily look better, it just looks different. But let's remind ourselves that this is on Twitter with extremely poor compression. This does not do the footage any sort of justice at all, and this would be something that's still in development, would be maybe a teaser or an accidental leak, not actually showcasing the full improved version. In other words, what we're seeing here isn't even close to as good as it would look if this is indeed either a free enhancement, a Switch 2 edition, or a definitive edition. So this may have been another leak from Nintendo about an upcoming big direct announcement, perhaps Xenoblade Chronicles games getting enhanced, and maybe even a definitive edition for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, personally, I don't like the idea of there being a definitive edition for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I think it should either be a free enhancement or a Switch 2 edition. I'm more than happy to pay an extra $10 or $20 to see Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and the other Xenoblade games be improved, but a definitive edition would come with an implication that it's an entire separate release where you have to pay probably $70 to play the game again. And I don't think that makes that much sense to expect, because the definitive editions not only come with the implication of enhanced visuals, but a variety of quality of life updates, which I still think a Switch 2 edition could have, but even also new content, which by the way a Switch 2 edition could also have. But given that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has already had its DLC expansion, various updates, I don't see them adding another big expansion to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. We already have Torn of the Golden Country, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is already a huge game, there doesn't need to be any more. So a definitive edition doesn't quite add up to me. I think more likely a Switch 2 edition would make perfect sense, and perhaps not even a $20 Switch 2 edition upgrade, but a $10 upgrade here. You can still sell it for $70 for those who have not picked up Xenoblade Chronicles 2 before. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the best-selling Xenoblade Chronicles game. It actually has a little bit of evergreen sales, so of all the different Xenoblade games that would make sense to get a Switch 2 edition, it would be Xenoblade Chronicles 2 the most, because they could put that out there, and that physical $70 release could see new buyers, but those who already have the game could just pay the $10 for the enhancement. Very similar to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, by the way. Those are not $80 Switch 2 editions, but $70, just a $10 game if you already have the game, or for free if you have Switch Online. I don't know if they'll do that for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but that is technically an option. And so I do see a Switch 2 enhancement for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 happening, it be a free or a Switch 2 edition. A definitive edition seems unlikely, but there have been a lot of whispers about something Xenoblade or Monolith Soft happening soon. If there's any weight to these whispers, then I do think that gives us optimism that perhaps this would be getting announced in a Nintendo Direct really soon. One would think next week, which would support the idea of this being a general and not a partner. Of course, even if there is something to these whispers, does not necessarily mean it's going to be announced immediately. It could be saved for when Nintendo does finally do their big general, and maybe their big general is being saved for a few months later, and we're just getting a partner next week. I don't know what's actually happening, I am uncertain, but I think this is certainly interesting, and I'm excited to see perhaps an enhanced version for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in the not-so-distant future, and maybe other Xenoblade games. But what do you all think? What do you make of all this latest information, rumors, and leaks? What do you think is actually going on? Are we getting the partner, or are we getting the bigger general? Tell me in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care.